Just after 3 in the morning, a family was traveling along a motorway in County Kildare. 3 sisters were inside the car. With them was a 7-year-old boy. They were heading towards Dublin Airport for a family trip. The road ahead should have been simple. Dark motorway. Headlights. Almost no traffic. And then coming towards them from the darkness was another car. But there was one terrifying problem. That car was traveling in the wrong direction, straight into oncoming traffic. Seconds later, the 2 vehicles collided head-on. Inside the car, traveling the wrong way, were 5 teenage boys. None of them survived. The 3 women and the young boy in the other car were rushed to hospital with serious injuries. At first, Ireland was left with one obvious question. How does a car end up traveling the wrong way down a motorway? Was it a mistake? Did the driver take the wrong entrance? Did they realize too late what had happened? But as investigators began reconstructing the hours before the collision, a much more disturbing picture emerged. Because according to Garda investigators, this was not the first time that car had traveled the wrong way that night. They believe it happened at least twice. And suddenly this was no longer just a story about one catastrophic wrong turn. It became a story about what had been happening for hours before the crash. A story that would stretch from the streets of Athy to a service station, to Garda patrol cars, to social media, and finally to a motorway in the darkness. The story begins earlier that night in Athy, County Kildare. Investigators collected closed-circuit television footage and footage from doorbell cameras around the town. The recordings showed young males apparently checking cars and houses. According to reporting based on the Garda investigation, officers believe the young people captured in that footage were the same group who later died in the motorway collision. The activity appeared opportunistic, checking doors, looking for vehicles, money, or belongings that could be taken quickly. At around 2 in the morning, Garda officers became aware that a vehicle carrying a group of teenagers was moving around the area. Members of the public had apparently raised the alarm. Patrol cars began searching. Eventually, Garda officers attempted to intervene and stop the car. But the car did not stop. And this is where the timeline becomes much more important, because early reports created another mystery. The car involved in the fatal crash was initially suspected of being stolen. It was not registered to any of the teenagers. It was not registered to their families either. Considering the reports of attempted thefts that night, that detail immediately raised questions. But investigators later established something different. They now believe the car itself had not been stolen. Instead, Garda investigators believe it had changed hands for a small amount of money earlier that month, without the registration information being properly updated. More detailed reporting later placed the purchase price at around €1,000. That correction matters, because the story is not that 5 teenagers stole a car and crashed it. That is not what investigators currently believe. What investigators are examining is far more complicated. During the period between around 2 and 3 in the morning, the car was seen or reported at different locations. At one point, it traveled along the motorway in the correct direction. It also traveled along smaller roads near the motorway. Garda officers continued trying to locate it. Investigators believe the teenagers were attempting to provoke officers into a prolonged pursuit. And then came the decision that would change everything. The car entered the motorway traveling against traffic. Not beside traffic. Not across traffic. Directly against it. Cars approaching from the other direction would have been seeing headlights coming straight towards them on a road where that should never happen. But somehow that first wrong-way journey did not end in disaster. The driver performed the U-turn. The car was now facing the correct direction again. For a moment, the immediate danger had been corrected. And this is the point where the story could have ended. They could have left the motorway. They could have stopped. They could have gone home. But according to the Garda reconstruction, that is not what happened. The car traveled into a service station near Kilcullen. Then it returned to the motorway. And once again, it was traveling the wrong way, southbound, on the carriageway meant for vehicles traveling north. Think about that for a moment. The first time it already demonstrated exactly how dangerous this was. The car had already been traveling towards oncoming vehicles. The driver had already corrected the direction. Yet investigators believe the vehicle went back onto the motorway and did it again. Garda officers were in the area. Investigators suspect the teenagers had either seen Garda activity or believed officers were close. But there's another detail that needs to be made absolutely clear. According to reporting on the investigation, Garda officers were not directly pursuing the car while it made its final wrong-way journey. There had been a pursuit earlier near Athy. But during the fatal run against motorway traffic, there was no Garda vehicle immediately chasing behind it. Instead, officers were trying something different. Further ahead, Garda officers had prepared an operation near an exit. They were ready with tire deflation devices. The plan was to stop the car if it left the motorway. But the car never reached them. It kept going, still traveling against traffic. And at around 3 in the morning near Moon in County Kildare, it met the Hyundai carrying the family. There was nowhere for the two stories to go after that except directly into each other. 5 teenagers died. 4 innocent people in the other vehicle were seriously injured. And Ireland began asking how behavior this dangerous had reached this point. Then investigators, journalists, and politicians began looking at something that had been happening online. Videos. Lots of them. Accounts showing cars reportedly stolen. Drivers speeding through streets. Young passengers filming from inside vehicles. Garda cars appearing behind them. People celebrating escapes. And, most disturbingly, footage showing vehicles traveling against traffic. Some of these posts attracted thousands of likes and shares. One account connected to one of the teenagers who died was later banned by TikTok. Other accounts showing similar behavior were also removed. But this was not simply one video. And investigators have not established that a single online challenge caused the fatal collision. That distinction is important. What journalists uncovered was a wider network of accounts where dangerous driving, stolen cars, and confrontations with Garda officers were being filmed and turned into content. The language around some of those posts revealed exactly what was being chased. Attention, views, recognition. In one case investigated by the Journal, the message was brutally simple. The person wanted to become famous. And now Ireland was forced to confront an uncomfortable question. What happens when behavior that was once done in front of a handful of friends can suddenly be performed in front of thousands of strangers? Because the motorway crash was not the first warning. Only days earlier, another car carrying a group of young people had traveled the wrong way during a separate motorway incident near Dublin. That vehicle had been stolen. Several young people were injured. Garda representatives said officers had been dealing with deliberate wrong-way driving as an attempt to escape police for years. So this was not something that suddenly appeared on the night of the County Kildare crash. The warning signs already existed. The difference was what happened when those warning signs ended with 5 deaths and 4 innocent people in hospital. After the crash, Garda representatives began publicly questioning whether officers had enough training and resources to deal with these situations. They said officers had different levels of driving instruction but lacked dedicated pursuit training. That creates an almost impossible decision. If officers continue chasing a vehicle behaving recklessly, the pursuit itself can become more dangerous. But if officers stop pursuing, the driver can continue. And when the driver is prepared to enter a motorway against traffic, every approaching vehicle becomes part of that decision. The government responded by promising pursuit training. Officials also began discussing stronger legal measures for deliberate wrong-way motorway driving. But the political argument quickly moved beyond Garda policy. Attention turned towards social media companies. Ireland's media regulator contacted TikTok and asked what the company was doing to detect and remove videos promoting dangerous and criminal behavior. Politicians wanted answers too. TikTok was invited to appear before an Oireachtas committee. The company initially declined the public appearance and instead offered a private briefing. The committee was not satisfied. On Friday, it invited TikTok again. This time, other major technology companies were also invited. The planned discussion is no longer simply about one crash. It is about online content promoting criminal behavior, and whether platforms are reacting quickly enough when dangerous behavior becomes entertainment. But amid that debate, one fact can easily be forgotten. There are families at the center of this. 5 families lost teenage sons. Another family began what should have been an ordinary journey towards an airport, and instead ended up in hospitals. 3 sisters and the 7-year-old boy had no involvement in anything that happened earlier that night. They were simply using the motorway. That is what makes the final section of the Garda timeline so difficult to understand. The car had already traveled the wrong way once. It had turned around. It had corrected its direction. There had been an opportunity for the danger to end. Instead, investigators believe it happened again. And that second wrong-way journey ended in a head-on collision. There is still much investigators have not publicly explained. We do not know every conversation that happened inside that car. We do not know precisely what each teenager believed was happening during those final minutes. And there is no verified evidence proving that social media alone caused the decisions made that night. But we do know what happened around them. Dangerous driving videos were circulating. Young car theft crews were posting encounters with Garda officers. Wrong-way motorway driving had already occurred in other incidents. Garda representatives were already concerned about how officers should respond. And after the deaths, TikTok, politicians, the media regulator, and Garda leadership all became part of the same national argument. That may be the most disturbing part of this story. The crash did not reveal a completely unknown danger. It exposed the danger that people were already watching happen. Online, on Irish roads, and in front of Garda officers who were trying to work out how to stop it without making the situation even more dangerous. 5 teenagers died that Sunday morning. 4 people traveling in the opposite direction were seriously injured. But the question Ireland is now trying to answer reaches far beyond that motorway. How do you stop dangerous behavior when the danger itself has become content? And how many warnings do you get before one of those videos becomes a real tragedy?